Good afternoon to all our Supreme Fertility viewers and listeners out there live on Facebook this afternoon. I'm very excited to be joined by a very dedicated and passionate dietitian, Marenel Pansegrouw. And so I'm so glad that she's managed to book us into her schedule and take some time out of her busy day to join us this afternoon. So welcome, Marenel. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Debbie. Appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. And just before we get going, Marenel, just give us, our listeners, just a little bit of a background about who you are, about the dietitian groupies that you work for, where your offices are, etc., before we get going this afternoon.
Okay. So I'm part of Dietitians at Health. So we have two practices, the one in Jean Avenue in Centurion and the other one in Midstream. I've been practicing now for 10 years, counting onwards, and every day is exciting because you learn something new as you go on. So we're passionate about functional nutrition and making things practical for patients, that they get to do it practically in their homes and in their lifestyles and at work. So yes.
Oh, no, fantastic. And I know one of the areas that you're also passionate about is fertility and helping couples struggling to have babies, etc., which is one of the services that you also offer. So how did you become passionate about this fertility area, and why did you decide to offer this service in your practice?
As a mom of 3 kids, I mean, you see your friends, you see some of your colleagues and so on struggle to fall pregnant. And then you become curious to know about what's the differences between me and her, or what's the difference between my husband and that husband, for example, that man. And then you realize that there's certain things that affects our bodies and the therapeutic effect of food. So, I mean, that's my curiosity, is to know how food and how environment really helps us to flourish. And if you change some things, how can we flourish? So that's my excitement always, is to know more about that. And if we can have someone have the joy of a baby, why not?
No, I 100% agree with you. And I know there are so many factors that can affect fertility and patients or couples that can help cause them to struggle to have a baby. And like one of these areas that a lot of people don't know about that I want to touch on this afternoon is like thyroid health. So if you don't have a proper functioning thyroid, it can affect not only fertility in females, but for men as well. So can you give us just a little bit more of an overview about what this thyroid hormone is and what it does in the body and why it's so important?
Okay. So the thyroid is a gland. It's more or less in this position, you're on your throat, and it has a major role in how you metabolize. If you were a child, a baby, for example, how you grow, how your body develops, and so on. But it regulates so many body functions. Okay, so by continuously giving some hormones to different cells, and if you don't have enough of those hormones, then certain areas of the body don't function as well. So for men and women, it can be a problem in how they function if they don't have enough of this hormone that's going around. And there's different types of hormone that down-regulates it too. So that the thyroid hormone, T3, T4, that's common names that you'll hear your doctor speaking about. So it's very, very important to know that you have a good thyroid.
And what kind of things can go wrong with the thyroid? I know there's different kinds of issues that can potentially go wrong, and a lot of our listeners might not even know about this. So can you maybe just quickly, briefly mention what can actually go wrong with the thyroid?
Yes, so some people will be very familiar with my thyroid is underactive or my thyroid is slow. So that is one of the things that we see very, very commonly. The other thing that we can see is when the thyroid is overactive. And then you also get like an autoimmune component to this as well. So underactive thyroid is very, very common, and people may experience different symptoms compared to when it's overactive. So there's a few things that you can look for actually. And the symptoms, like when it's underactive, can include like fatigue. You can have sore joints, for example, cold feeling more often, constipation, mood changes like depression coming in, your hair changing to falling out more often, and then your skin also changing. So your cholesterol can even increase when your thyroid is underactive. When it's overactive, you may find different mood enhancements like anxiety creeping in more. You may have sleeplessness, insomnia. You can have more heart palpitations or faster heartbeats, more diarrheas, and then your hair might have more brittleness to it and your skin thinning. So, I mean, there's differences when we talk about thyroid and you list these symptoms to your doctor. They may actually get the lead to actually test your thyroid and to see what's happening, because these are the common symptoms that we see.
Yeah, and I think when you're speaking about an underactive thyroid, it's women that have an underactive thyroid about 3 times more likely to have fertility issues than those that don't. So when we're speaking about fertility and these thyroid functions that are not functioning 100%, what kind of fertility problems could it potentially cause in men and women, and are there any difference at all?
Yes. Definitely there's differences. So if you look at reproductive health, we would look at different reproductive organs as well. So men and women don't have the same reproductive organs. So for men, for example, when their thyroid is not happy, they can have problem with their semen quality. So how the semen appears on the microscope, for example, can change. How it swims can change. The count can be different. How their mood is and their libido is can change when the thyroid is over or underactive. So for men, it's very, very important to note if there's any changes in the thyroid. For women, different. Your cycle can be different. So it can be either very long or very short or irregular completely. It can be absent. Then how you ovulate, how you produce egg cells can also change where it's not optimum. So your thyroid controls anything almost in the body, or everything almost in the body. So if you look at reproductive organs, we have to look at all those organs as well. Okay, so it's very, very important that it affects like the reproductive system entirely for men and for women.
No, thanks, Marenel. I think it's a very good basic introduction for people to understand. And a part of the whole Supreme Fertility Program is, I know we pay a lot of attention to diet and lifestyle. I'm looking at things in those areas that could be potentially affecting fertility. And are there any particular lifestyle factors that you can think of offhand that could also possibly affect the functioning of a thyroid gland?
Yeah, so, I mean, quite common causes would be in an environment where you are smoking. So whether it's first degree, like cigarette smoking or secondhand smoking, air pollution. If you think about fluoride in toothpaste and water can affect your thyroid, where there's overexposure to fluoride. And then heavy metals such as mercury and so on can also affect your thyroid. So there's many things if you think about how we're exposed to so many chemicals in our environment. Actually, everything can be an endocrine or a hormone disruptor. And we have to look at the whole environment and say, but how much do you actually put into your body, what willingly, and what can you change? Where do you live, for example, can also influence your thyroid health if you're living like too close, maybe to high pollutants in the air, for example. Let's just say, for example, living next to a petrol station can also make your environment unhealthy.
And it's really things that people don't think about often. If you're trying to have a baby, people don't really pay much attention to what they're eating and where they're living and what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis that can affect their fertility. And I know another issue that is commonly spoken about is something like stress, because stress really can affect people in many different ways and predispose them to many different kind of conditions, and even fertility in some ways. But when we're looking at thyroid health, is stress a factor there as well, and can it influence a healthy thyroid gland?
For sure, because if you look at stress, it affects your cortisol levels. So often in the office, I explain, like when you're stressing, it's like you're putting your foot on the petrol in your car. And while you have this high output in cortisol, then the body needs to run all the time. But then your thyroid comes in as the brake pedal almost, and then it slows down because you need to slow down. You can't keep running. That's not how we are prone to function. So if your thyroid then slows down, basically every other function in your body will also slow down. And if you think about reproduction then as well, definitely there will be outfalls if your stress levels are too high. So the analogy of a car, like having the petrol being pushed all the time, you can't put the petrol brake on and the brake simultaneously on. It needs to be either or. So you need to think about that.
And I love the analogy that you're using of the car, because I think it really explains it quite nicely and easy to understand. You did mention a little bit earlier about the endocrine disruptors and some of the substances in the food and stuff that we are exposed to that can affect your thyroid. But are there any like factors on lifestyle factors that we should be mindful of when it comes to our healthy thyroid?
Yeah, so in the thyroid, you would look at definitely like stress, exposure, lifestyle things would be when you're not active enough. So how sensitive our T3 hormone will be depends on if we're active actually. If you're very sedentary, then the activity of the hormone would be less. So if you think about smoking, drinking alcohol, for example, can also affect caffeine intake, can affect this as well. So you want to make sure that if a man is drinking 10 cups of coffee, but it interferes with his thyroid health, then it's a problem, actually. Yes. And if the end goal is to have a baby, then we need to talk about these things. So, yeah. So, and then in lifestyle, we look at food as well. So certain exposures to unhealthy food ingredients can also affect your thyroid health. So often when we look at like people's nutritional status, we often think about being fat or thin, and that's the only thing we think about in terms of being nourished. But when we look at fertility, there's so many things else that you need to look at if you've got enough micronutrients. So having enough zinc, having enough selenium, vitamin D, some of your beta carotenes in your body, iodine, for example, can also affect how your thyroid works. So it's so crucial to look at the whole body and to say, my sleeping patterns matter in this. If I'm exposed to pollutants, if I have deep breathing that I'm doing often enough, just to calm down, and how I perceive or handle my stress to improve that as well. Because all those things in the end, it's not a single thing that you're doing, it's multiple things that you're doing that's making everything work better.
No, absolutely. And being a dietitian, I know nutrition is your passion and your area of focus. Just a few highlight tips, particular foods that are really good for the thyroid gland that you could maybe just mention and people could take note of there.
Okay, so the thyroid really needs, if you think about selenium, we would think about foods that, like nuts and seeds in general, contain selenium. Some nuts and seeds do contain more than others, but in general, we would advise people to have more nuts and seeds in their diet. And that can be like a whole hand of nuts where there's some Brazil nuts and sunflower seeds in especially. It can be trail mixes. I often ask my patients to make like seed crackers, because then we know we're getting more of those foods in. If you think about having the combination of your orange and your green vegetables, for example, you get beta carotene. Important. If you think about fish and seafood, often they do contain iodine, which we do need in our diet, and the omega-3s, which got a different effect on the thyroid and how we handle insulin and so on, which is a different layer to this. So if you think about vitamin D, not so many food sources per se, but then we look at, like, if you have fatty fish and you have more intake of the bones of the fish, like in sardines, for example, some of your mushrooms, your full cream milks, and so would have some vitamin D in. But the important thing is there to look at your blood tests and to get some sun exposure, some safe sun exposure, and if it's not appropriate, then we would supplement. But yeah, our food and our soils are often depleted in many of these minerals, so we need to take a lot of these foods in actually to get sufficient levels. So it's so crucial to look at many of these things. So in general, I would advocate we would just look at a diet that's nutrient rich opposed to that's nutrient poor. So often people are high in diets that's actually bad for the thyroid, where they very much have processed foods that's actually already broken down so much, the nutrient quality and quantity is very depleted in it, and then they need to take supplements often. So yeah, having a good diet is so crucial.
I think you're making it sound so easy, but for a lot of the listeners out there, it's quite challenging. So maybe they can really consider getting in touch with you and maybe booking an appointment so you can really help them with that. Because I know it sounds a lot easier than it is to implement all these healthy changes, because we are creatures of habit and we like eating the same kind of foods, and they're not necessarily good or healthy for us, or even worse, can have more of a negative impact on our fertility as such. So can the Supreme Fertility Program give you any idea of patients' risks for potential thyroid problems, and how would you use the Supreme Fertility Program to identify those risks and put steps and action plans in process to assist them?
Yeah, so I think it's very struggle to fall pregnant, or we have multiple miscarriages, implantation issues that we need to look at, but where's the risks? So often when we look at the genetic testing, and if you see, okay, but we need certain nutrients, more of it. And the genetic SNPs can help you identify where you have higher requirements of certain things, or where you're more sensitive to certain things. So we did mention, for example, caffeine can be a reason why people struggle to fall pregnant, because it interferes with certain absorption of nutrients, or it interferes with certain processes or the implantation. Trans fats, if you look at saturated fats and so on. So it's identify those pathways that will actually interfere with the process, and then to say, but now we have like objectives that we can work on, and to say now we need to focus, and to say we don't have to do all the recommendations, but focusing on very key things can make a big difference. So if we look at like identifying people that struggle, for example, or really want to do it better, the test can really help to pinpoint very particular pathways that we need to work on, and doing practical things in the office and at home and at work, in your car, when you're on vacation, to make yourself better. So when we know the risk factors, it's easier to work on them. So if we look at different types of foods that we need to focus on, we make it practical for the patient then to say, but I need to plan this into my lunchbox. I need to plan this into my snack box. So practical stuff. So I think that the tests are valuable, that we know that we can do something about it, and we can identify and prevent like going through this emotional turmoil where you go through the process over and over and over, but you actually don't know what's the cause of this if the doctor cannot pick up any particular cause.
I think one of the things I like, and I think most healthcare practitioners, is identifying these critical biomarkers that you can actually measure, because we want to like check the effectiveness of our treatment protocols. I think the thyroid is definitely one of them. We can measure a patient's thyroid profile. You can put them on dietary and lifestyle changes. We can monitor their medication, etc. And in a few months' time, you can recheck those biomarkers to see is it working what we've told them to do, and have they been sticking to it? Because I think that's also often the problem. So Marenel, just before you go, I know you're very busy and your waiting room's probably full of patients out there, but if anybody that's listening would like to get hold of you, that's in your neck of the woods and wants to book an appointment, how do they reach you, and how can they get hold of you and book an appointment?
Okay, so our practice is on social media, so it's Midstream Hill Dietitian, so you can just look it up. Even if you make a spelling mistake, I'm sure it will pop up somewhere. But otherwise, if you want to access our website, it's www.dietitians@health, and then everything is written out, .coza. So, I mean, you're welcome. Then just look up on social media, different practices, or the website, and then there's a list of dietitians that can assist you. That's good with making things practical and relating to people's stories. Because we all live our life and we all have our experiences, but it's good to share our experiences as well.
And just to learn a bit more. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was very insightful. I know I learned one or two things more about the thyroid that I might not have been aware of at this stage yet. So thank you for taking time, Marenel, for sharing your information. And so if any of the listeners would like to get in touch with you and they didn't manage to jot down that email address, I will add it onto the end of our recording, but they're also welcome just to get in touch with me at Supreme Fertility, and I'll push them in your direction. So once again, thanks for joining us, and have a lovely, lovely weekend.
You too.